Hello, I'm John Janarone, Editor-in-Chief of CorpGov. Very happy to be here at Nasdaq Market Site with Ira Gorsky at Edelman Smithfield. However, I've known Ira for a long time, going back to my days at the Wall Street Journal. When I was writing the Herd in the Street column, and I've got to say this, Ira, don't want to make you blush, I would call you almost every day to ask you what was going on. Ira, thanks for joining the program.
Happy to be here.
So let's talk deals. Transactions announced. Where does Edelman Smithfield come into play?
So when a deal is announced, it has all sorts of variations because anyone that's read the background section of a proxy sees that there's a lot of back and forth. A lot of deals don't come to fruition. There's also issues. So we get involved depending on the relationship, sometimes very early, sometimes very late. And one of the key things that we've got to figure out when we get brought in is the leak risk. Because if you can have a very sensitive deal break in the market where the senior executives aren't ready for everyone else to know, employees could get rattled, they don't have any of their strategies ready. So we scenario that out for them. So sometimes we're brought in pretty early and through the negotiation, sometimes very last minute, work over the weekend, get a deal announced.
You know, I'm going to sneak a question in, just popped in my mind. Who are the leakers? Is it the investment bankers?
You know, you never know because you know, when it's leaked, you can't trace it. What is typically, I suspect from my years of doing this, is that when you have an auction and you have certain parties that drop out of the auction, they're not incentivized to withhold the information anymore. And information's currency. So if you're a banker and you represent a firm and then you drop out, you may want to curry favor with an M&A reporter. And I've yet to see it traced back to anyone. And then it winds up leaking.
Well, I mean, they want to keep quiet, I guess.
Yes.
All right, so setting that aside, what are the steps you want to take to prepare for a transaction before, hopefully, no leak, and you make a crisp announcement, hits the Wall Street Journal Monday morning?
So there's a lot that goes into it. First thing that you have got to do is figure out who your stakeholders are. So that's going to be your customers, employees, investors, and could be your vendors, could be some key partnerships, and you've got to figure out what they're interested in. Then you have the message of the overall transaction. Why are we doing this? What's the strategic rationale? And then the second order effect of that is how it's going to affect all these other stakeholders. So what we lay out in the comms plan is documents and the ways that we're going to communicate with everyone. So the way that we think about it broadly is we've got the goals of what we're trying to communicate, we've got them boiled down into messages and talking points, and then we've got the actual tactics, which is going to be the press release, the presentation, interviews, whether it be just print or broadcast.
Gotcha. You know, it's funny, Ira, this is CorpGov here, but after all, in your stint, well, I should say more than a stint, quite a few years on the buy side, you cared about what shareholders wanted. But what you're telling me is that there's a lot more to it than that. You care about employees, partners, vendors, everybody, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So as an ARB, I'm just playing the public knowledge related to the transaction. I'm just betting on whether the deal's going to happen or not. And when the deal closes, as an ARB, I don't care if the employees are upset. I'm out. But as someone who's helping the company, how the employees feel about things are critical. What relationships that they could potentially burn with vendors. The other thing from an antitrust standpoint, other regulators, very problematic. But investors are a key constituency because that's the most observable fact of how people react to it. So if you're the acquirer and your stock gets killed by 20%, not only does it show that the market doesn't like it or they're surprised, but it also could invite an activist to potentially block a vote if your deal requires it.
Makes a lot of sense. It's funny, Ira, in my years of doing this, I've very often seen CFOs pick up on the term ARB in a pretty negative way very fast once they're in a deal. They don't like you guys. Well, not anymore.
Well, it's deservedly so. I mean, ARBs, there's a really wide range, and when you're an ARB, you've got a flow of information. The deal hits a lot of the times in an industry that you know nothing about and a company you haven't heard of, and then you're scrambling to get information. So companies don't like ARBs because they call constantly, probably at a rate of 100 times a regular shareholder. And then they're asking about minutia, and they're also often asking about things that companies could never tell them. About antitrust process, exactly when the proxy's coming out, all of those things. But yes, it's ARBs are just doing their job. They're people too.
All right, so last topic, I want to ask you about cleanup. So if a deal is poorly received, you do everything right, you think, of course you do, because everyone's preparing, but sometimes it just doesn't flow well. People are unhappy about it. So what do you do then?
So if it's reacted by shareholders poorly, the shareholders didn't like it, they didn't like it for a reason. Typically, when you see the stock go down, that means shareholders are voting with their feet. So they've sold out of that position. So now if they were, let's say an investor is unhappy because a company did something that's out of their core competency, now those investors are gone. It may be appealing to someone who thinks that, oh, this company bought this new acquisition for growth. Maybe it's now a better growth stock. So we pivot to who it might be interesting. There's also dislocation in price, which could be more interesting for people. And if there's a lot of apprehension about layoffs and it's untrue, we could really talk about why the company was purchased, that it's important to retain people, that it was purchased for a specific reason, and maintaining it as an operating enterprise is the most important thing.
See, I find this all fascinating because most of the discussions we have seem to center on shareholder primacy, but at the end of the day, you do have to think about all the stakeholders, and that's what you're telling me. Before and after, goes good, goes bad, whatever. That's right, huh?
Yeah, even companies that have, let's say, a miner that has a specific asset, they're buying them for the asset, but you still need the people to operate it. And if you're really disruptive to the enterprise itself, you're destroying a lot of value. It's very important that people need to see transparency, and they need to know that management is on their side and they're working for the betterment of the entire company.
Well put. We're going to leave it there, Ira. This has been Ira Gorsky, Executive Vice President at Edelman Smithfield. I'm signing off. John Janarone of CorpGov here at Nasdaq Market Site.